Hello, everyone. So my name is Sarah. This is my email address. If you're a recruiter, I do not want to hear from you. I work for a company called Mobile Travel Technologies. I've been working for them since last November. I used to be more of a Java developer, and I moved into JavaScript development just in the last few years. So I came on to Mobile Travel Technologies as a mobile web developer. So what they do is they do mostly native apps for the travel industry. They developed the EasyJet app, Singapore Airlines app, LAN and TAM apps in South America. And the particular project that I'm working on, they already have an Android and iOS app, and they wanted a responsive web solution to complement that and to support the devices that they weren't currently supporting, like BlackBerry phones, Windows phones, tablets, and also for desktops as well. So it's a little bit about me. So I'm actually developing for a specific customer at the moment. So this is just a side thing. If anyone wants to talk to me, I'm one of the leaders of Coder Dojo Girls, and I'm also an organizer of Coolest Projects. And I just wanted to put this up here to also say thanks to David and Zendesk for being a sponsor for Coolest Projects this year. I'm not going to go into them now and hijack the talk, so if anyone wants to talk to me about them afterwards, you're more than welcome. And we're also just looking for volunteers if you're interested in signing up. So what I can talk about today is I'd like to give you a technology overview, so why we chose particular technologies for our project, some of the challenges we faced, and how we're planning for the future. So this project is really early days. I mean, we only started it late December, so I guess I wanted to give a talk more aimed at people starting out, because I know it can be really frustrating. You don't know, especially if you're on your own starting a project, just so you feel like you're not on your own. And I also want to kind of say to you all, anyone here who is doing development day to day can do a talk. If I can do it, you can do it. Particularly girls, we need a lot more girls to get up there and speak about why they love being in technology instead of speaking about why there's not enough girls in technology all the time. So what I can't talk about today is specifics about the project, and I can't show you demos, and I can't show you specific project code because I'm working for a customer at the moment. Until go live date, that's all in lockdown. So I do apologize for that, but I'm hoping that once we go live, I can come back here and show you some cool stuff. So the technologies that we chose AngularJS. I'll go into why in a minute. We use Bower for managing our third-party JavaScript dependencies. And we chose Require.js, maybe a little bit controversial. We use Node.js just for hosting the Angular app. And for responsiveness, we chose Angular Strap, which is just a port for Bootstrap for Angular, to give you an Angular module. And for our build scripts, we use Gulp, which is also JavaScript-based. So just a little bit about Require.js was always kind of one, I wasn't really sure whether it was a good idea or not. Looked at lots of different projects, but found some good sample projects that did use Require.js with Angular. So decided to give it a go. To be perfectly honest with you, if I was starting again, I probably wouldn't use it. It's quite frustrating starting out. You get a lot of Require.js timeout issues trying to learn how to tie everything together. Yeah, I'll give you more examples of some of those problems later on in the talk. So if you've been to an Angular talk before, this is a pretty common graph. I'm sure a lot of you might have seen it. And this is how it feels to start working with Angular. It's really a lot of ups and downs, a lot of kind of frustrations. You think something's really cool one minute, and then the next day you're pulling your hair out. So for my team, we're kind of about here right now. So this is, I'd say, 4 months in, 4 months in. This is kind of how we feel at the moment. So we're getting there slowly but surely. So starting this project, it started with just me on my own. which was quite daunting. I'd only joined the company. I was thrown on this project, and it was up to me to figure out what technologies we were going to use. So I started prototyping on my own. So first thing was to evaluate different JavaScript libraries. So the first one I looked at was Meteor.js because it seemed quite cool at the time. But after kind of playing around with it a bit, I felt it just wasn't quite production ready. I didn't feel it would scale. And it kind of feels like a bit like the framework of the week kind of thing. I wasn't sure how well it was going to last. Looked a little bit into Backbone.js because I knew the guys joining the project had some Backbone experience. But it just didn't feel structured enough. I mean, it's really more of a library than a framework, and I kind of felt we'd be spending a lot more time writing. We'd have to write a lot more code to get the job done, and that means maintaining more code as well. So it kind of put us off the idea. We do have an in-house solution JavaScript framework in MTT, which was a pretty cool solution. It was really modular. It is working very well for one of the projects that we have. But one of the reasons we didn't choose to go with it was because it was designed more for like an admin console, which didn't work quite well for our project. And I felt that we'd spend half our time maintaining this in-house framework instead of spending all our time just developing the features we wanted to develop. So when I started looking at AngularJS, it ticked a lot of the boxes for us. We wanted to get up and running quickly. We felt there's just so much support for it on the net. If you look up it's kind of Google statistics, so it's kind of hard to say whether it's accurate or not. But if you look up the most searched JavaScript framework, it's AngularJS by Double. So it's hard to say, is that because everyone has problems with it? But you know, the other thing about AngularJS is that they're putting a lot of effort into it. Angular 2.0 will be mobile first. There's a lot of changes, but we definitely felt it was the best way to go to future-proof our project. So starting out, for anyone who is thinking of embarking on a similar project or a new project, I did this all day. Because when you look how to make, a modular Angular app, you get these really basic examples online. Everything is like from complete beginner's level. And it's really frustrating when you're trying to figure out, but is this going to work for a large, big app, kind of production ready? All I can see is these tiny, stupid, fiddly examples. So the best thing I could find was to just clone a whole lot of stuff on GitHub and play around with stuff, break it. That was really the best way I could find of doing it. So that's what I'd recommend. So when I was prototyping, what I settled with was a solution from cleverstack.io because it got me up and running really quickly. They had like the whole login form done for you. So it allowed me to kind of prototype connecting to our internal APIs and getting back data and kind of getting a real feel for it. So that's kind of where we started off. So about 2 weeks in, another developer joined the team, so I wasn't on my own anymore. Yes. And our job was to get kind of a seed project together to be ready for the other developers to come on board. So we didn't want to take the prototype as is. We wanted to start from a clean slate so that we really owned every piece of code that is going into this project. We didn't want to take something that was generated by something else and not really fully understand it. So our job was kind of to get a clear folder structure together, to define the whole process, to get sample pages up there and to get some sample tests there ready for the developers to come on board and start working straight away. So this is the folder structure we kind of went with initially. This is similar to the prototype that I was developing with the cleverstack.io framework. So what I liked about this was that you had separate modules, and in CleverStack, they actually pull out a lot of these modules and host them separately on different repos. And I quite liked the fact that you could do that, which means you could probably share a module across lots of different projects you're working on very easily. And And the module is completely self-contained, like even your resources, your internationalization files, your images, everything that that module needs is in that module. So it's very easy to pull it out and reuse it. And then each of these separate folders, like, so in Angular you have modules, and then in the controllers folder is its own module itself. So you'd have like auth.controllers module, you'd have an auth.filters module, etc. So tests, when it comes to testing in Angular, I think most people use these tools. So we use the Karma test runner, works pretty well. We use Jasmine because we quite like behavior-driven tests in MTT. And Protractor is just the #1 for integration testing, end-to-end testing. It's developed by Google specifically for Angular. And if any of you have used other integration frameworks like Casper.js, you'll know that it can be really frustrating when you have to put sleeps into your test in order to get it to wait for the browser to catch up when you're running your tests. So the nice thing about Protractor is it syncs really well with the browser, so you don't have to be putting sleeps in everywhere all over your code. It also has some cool features like you can spawn multiple instances of, say if you're testing in Chrome, you can say, I want to run with 10 instances of Chrome, and it will launch 10 Chrome browsers and split your tests across 10 browsers so that it's done in a fraction of the time it would be otherwise. So we use Gulp for our build scripts. So the reason we chose Gulp over Grunt is that Grunt is kind of more configuration-based, whereas I really liked that Gulp was more code-based. We all love writing JavaScript already. Why not write all our build scripts in JavaScript as well? And what we found is that the developers actually enjoy maintaining build scripts when they're written in Gulp. Whereas before, in previous projects, I've used things like Ant, which is just like, don't touch it with a barge pole. The files don't get updated for years. So, like one example, one of the require.js issues I had was I was creating a test, and for some reason, the Angular library was not available in my test, and I couldn't figure out why. I was pulling my hair out for hours. Why just this test do I not have my Angular library? Well, not just that test, but... So eventually one of the other developers spotted the problem. There was a rogue semicolon in my require.js test config. When I was exporting the name Angular, there was Angular with a little semicolon before the last comma, and I was like, oh. So the developer came back the next day and said, hey, guess what I did last night? I said, what? I wrote my own Gulp plugin. So what does it do? It detects semicolons at the end of strings. It's like, cool. But like he just did that in an evening, just for fun. So another thing I like to do with my Gulp scripts is I like to organize them quite neatly so that it's really obvious where to find the different Gulp tasks. Because it's one thing I always hate about build scripts is where the hell is the task for such and such a thing. So this makes it nice and tidy. You just require in your different files in your main Gulp file.js. So a little bit on how we make it responsive. We're using the Angular Strap library. It's just a bootstrap, really, ported for Angular. And in our project, we support 3 breakpoints. So the Bootstrap grid supports 4. We've chosen to support 3. So in our company, we work really closely with designers. We have a designer specifically for our team. So he gives us 3 different designs, mobile, tablet, and desktop. And I would use those terms quite loosely because it really depends on the device. You get some really big phones that will end up displaying the tablet view, or you'll get even some small laptops will end up displaying your tablet view. So they're very much loose terms because it only goes by the number of pixels available on your screen, which isn't always ideal because you get some really high-res displays, but we try and make the site as responsive as possible so that it looks well across as many devices. It's a little bit trial and error. And what you'll find with working with designers, if you leave them off to just come up with 3 designs at the start, they will come back with something really pretty, but it won't be responsive because it'll mean you'd have to develop different components to display it across different size screens, which really isn't responsive at all. So what we do in our project is, instead of giving the designer a job to do, what we start with is a whiteboard session. So we pull the developers and the designer together, and we just start scribbling up what we think will work for a particular component. And then when we're kind of happy it's responsive and happy it's a good technical decision as well as design decision, he'll go off and finish the design. And that's been working really well for us, although we did learn the hard way. So next step of the journey, the rest of the developers came on board. So I work with 3 really cool developers. They're all based in Poznan. And the problem was that we were kind of only a month into the project. We had the seed ready, but all the first stories you're working on are pretty much like login register kind of stuff, and everyone is stepping over each other. We're all learning Angular for the first time, and people start putting their own style on things, and lots of inconsistencies start creeping in. So I have regular video calls with the guys, and one Friday I was met with this. So they just were like, no, it's not working, not having this. All complaining about different things. One person liked it one way, one person liked it another way. So if I can give you any advice, someone told me at the start of the project, look up John Papa's style guide. And I went, yeah. I really wish I had just said, we are following this style guide and that's it from the start. Because now we've kind of crept in and we do, at the moment we're having kind of standards. We kind of have meetings, talk about standards, and we document how we want to go with our project. But it would have been a lot better just to use John Papa's style guide in the first place and not have arguments about it. So, yeah. So we kind of took a step back and started thinking, okay, is everything still working for us now that everyone's on the project, now that we've learned a bit more about Angular? Is there anything we think we need to change? And one thing that annoys me on some projects is that when people don't take ownership of the code, they're afraid to refactor. For me, a team who refactors often is a happy team. So it just makes everyone's life easier if you're not afraid to change your code. If you do test-driven development, you shouldn't be afraid to make changes. Yeah, I just like those pictures too. So the folder structure we're using stopped working for us. It started getting messy. Once we started writing a lot more directives. When you write a directive in Angular, it's pretty much directly linked with a HTML template, a snippet of HTML code. And it didn't really make much sense to have directives in a directives folder and the snippet of HTML it needs thrown in a views folder or templates folder somewhere else. So some of the developers are putting them together in a folder and some were splitting them up, and it just kind of got us thinking maybe we should make some changes. So this is another example from John Papa and how he uses a more component-based approach, which I really like, and it's kind of more where the standard of Angular is going as well, more component-based. So you would just split everything up into little components by name. Everything to do with that component is together. If a component starts getting too big, you split it out. And it also makes it easier to move things around into more common places later on if you find that they're more valuable across modules and things like that. So this is kind of the way we're going at the moment. So how do you plan for the future? So the thing about starting Angular now is you kind of feel like you're a bit in limbo because we're using Angular 1.3. 1.4 is on the way pretty soon. Angular 2.0 is not backwards compatible. There are a lot of changes. So it's kind of a bit scary. You're like, are we going to have to rewrite loads of stuff in just 2 months' time? One example of that, which made me nervous, was how to handle internationalization. So the best library I could find was Angular Translate. So internationalization is not something Angular is supporting very well in version 1.3, but it is something they are planning to support much better in future versions. And they're actually working quite closely with Pascal Precht, who's written this Angular Translate third-party library, to come up with a solution for future versions. So I was a bit nervous of putting specific attributes related to this third-party library littered through all our HTML files in our code if we were going to have to change them all in probably a month or 2 months' time. So what I decided to do, and maybe someone else has a better idea, I decided to create our own translation module and basically to create a wrapper around the third-party library. So we're using our own syntax, MTT translate. We're using our own attributes on HTML tags. And just for anyone who doesn't know, when you're writing a template in Angular, say you have a span of text, in order to say, I want to translate this using a translation code, you would just add this attribute to that span, and it would translate using the key. And we prefer using attributes because it means you can still keep kind of dummy English text between the span brackets, but they will get replaced at runtime. But it means as a developer, when you're glancing through your HTML files, you have a good idea of what text to expect. So yeah, we just wrap it and call that their provider instead. So I added this in last minute, so trying to get a bit more code out there. So another thing that we wanted to do was add server-side logging, because it's a bit nervous when you're supporting so many browsers. Like our customers adding more and more browsers as the days go on, and we feel like it's a bit endless, and it makes you quite nervous because you can't physically test on everything. So what we want to do is console errors are the worst. You can't ask a customer to go press F12, check the console, do you see an error? So what we're doing is creating an interceptor. So every time Angular is going to log an error to the console, we intercept that. It still displays it in the console, but we also write it to a server-side log. So we're using a library called JSN log at the moment. Not 100% happy with it, but it works. And you just create a log service, and JL is the third-party library we're calling, and that'll create a request to the server, which will then log it. So you need to write some server-side code for that as well, obviously. And then the log to server interceptor, you can implement an action for response request and response error. So a lot of the examples online allow you to, you kind of create a timestamp on the request, and then on the response, you can check how long has it taken for a response to come back, and you can create a warning in your logs if the response exceeds a certain amount of time. So with Angular and being nervous about the performance of it, it's probably a good option. And then the response error function will catch any other issues. So resources that I found useful. If I went through my browser history, I could probably add 100 down here. But these are just a few that came to mind. John Papa, really like all his GitHub stuff. It's really useful. ngconf videos on YouTube are really good. They'll give you a good picture of what's happening in Angular over the next year as well. Dan Whalen, so I find it's really hard to find good courses online that aren't just for complete beginners. So I really liked his course on directives. It was a little more advanced. And migrating to Angular 2.0, just to give you some pointers on what to avoid. Basically controllers and scope, and try and make it more component-based. And I'm sure I've forgotten loads of things. So yeah, and I do apologize that I can't show code samples today. I know it kind of sucks, but hopefully when we go live, they'll let me.
When you were evaluating the technology, you said you looked at Backbone and an in-house one. Why did you not look at Ember or React?
So Ember, I felt, was kind of similar to Angular in a lot of ways, but Angular had more traction. So that was kind of, I had looked at Ember in the past, and I did really like Ember for a while. I was kind of voting for Ember over Angular, but I just felt Angular had better support for us as all newbies on the project. I didn't look at React. I was just trying to pick something where there was good examples out there of real big production-ready apps, you know. I was very nervous with going with the smaller framework.
Yeah. No, it makes sense because, like, it's quite interesting. One of the sort of selling points of Ember is that it's quite opinionated, which is something you ended up having to impose on your team.
Yeah.
Know, an opinion of how to do things, whereas Angular does have that flexibility. And yeah, I guess like React, I don't know how, when you started evaluating this, you said like 6 months ago or something?
It was last December.
Yeah, there might not have been a huge amount of resources on like Flux and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that made me nervous about Ember as well is I felt that it's a bigger library. It's the biggest framework out there, and we're kind of mobile tablet first. So I just was worried about the size of the library becoming too big for us for that.
Yeah.
Not that Angular also might be too big for us, but so far performance testing has been good.
Do you load all the files for every device, or can you conditionally load, like, say, mobile kind of files? And
yeah, so at the moment we're actually loading everything. We're not having any performance problems. I mean, we're only using require.js to handle the dependencies at development time. When it comes to production ready, everything is minimized and thrown into small files. What we're kind of going to do is we're monitoring it. If we find a problem, we'll start implementing a solution. But we haven't seen problems yet, so we're kind of plowing ahead. But it is early days. We haven't started performance testing just yet.
Are you storing just HTML or use some? How are you storing your views?
Yeah,
is
so
just HTML, or you use, for example, some kind of processor or whatever?
Yeah, we're kind of, what we're doing at the moment is we're using a Gulp task, which will create an Angular module for your views, and it adds all the HTML snippets into the template cache. So all the HTML snippets are already available in the template cache when we load a module. So we do it on a module by module basis. I know it's something John Papa does as well, but he just has one for all the views together, but I wanted to split it up per module. So yeah, they're all preloaded and available, and it actually makes it a lot easier to write tests then for your directives, to have your HTML loaded via JavaScript module instead. So how Angular works is that if you don't pre-populate in the template cache, it'll load it as it needs it. So we decided to populate everything at the get-go. Have it all available.
Second question is, do you have a data tier? Data tier, or you just make AJAX requests from the controllers?
It's all requests. So at MTT we use a microservice architecture. So we have lots of different servers, Java backend servers. So a lot of what we do is just small requests.
No. I mentioned about data tier that on the client side.
Yeah.
And do you use some specific tier and specific entity for the data management, or you just make direct data calls from, for example, from controllers?
We're using some caching, but apart from that, it's kind of direct calls. So.
And what are you using on the server side, if it's not secret?
What are we using on the server side for?
What kind of framework? Express, for example, or?
Yeah, we're using Node Express, but it really just hosts the Angular app because all the data is stored behind a Java backend. So it's all RESTful APIs to multiple servers to get our data back. Our application is mostly a read-only application. We only have small parts at the moment which are writable. So. Kind of pulling back and displaying things in different ways, mostly.
Don't you consider using some packaging framework like Iconic for devices, or you just
no, because
just running the website?
We don't need it because we're not planning on wrapping it and making native apps with it, I guess. We also are quite big on design ourselves. We want to design everything ourselves. We want to put our own stamp in it. That's really important for our customer as well. What we've designed so far is really slick, and I really wish I was allowed to show you. We're using quite a lot of material design ideas. So hopefully in August I can come back with a demo. It'd be so cool.
Thank you. And do you have any tests, UI tests on the devices, like use Protractor? Probably.
Yeah, so we use Protractor. I've used Protractor to test on Safari, Chrome, and Firefox. And anything else is kind of our QA is testing manually at the moment.
On the desktop, not devices?
On desktop. So only on desktop at the moment, but we are changing the screen size.
Okay.
So that's what you can do in your Protractor test. You can change the screen size so it mimics a smaller device, a medium device, and a large device. So that's how we're kind of handling, and we're also using a, I can't remember the name of it, but it takes screenshots with every test as well, which is really useful to go back when a test fails to see what it looked like when it finished.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk firstly. I think I'm a month or two behind you in a similar sounding project. And we've just started looking at the server-side logging of our errors. And one of the problems we're anticipating is that a large bulk of these errors are going to be just network timeouts, especially since our technology is going into schools where they have really crappy internet connections. Have you looked at that, or do you have any test data to allay my fears? Or
Yeah, it's pretty new for us as well. So my plan is we have 2 months before we have the production app up and running and the customer testing on it. So we plan on fine-tuning, I think, in the next 2 months with QA testing on the box and the server-side logging and hoping to clean things up as we go along, really, because it's just hard to know what you're going to get, just you on your development machine. It's only when QA are going to be testing on our AWS server they're going to start seeing more issues, I think, so as well on lots of different devices.
all right, cheers.
Yes,
So just on that question, have you looked at the commercial or the equivalent server-side logging libraries, Honeybadger, Bugsnag, these?
No is the answer to that.
Well, I recommend you start looking because they do a lot of this and they have a lot of experience in this area. And there's a few open source attempts to do the same thing. Obviously, they won't be as powerful and as stable, but it's worthwhile looking because it's quite a known, solved issue.
Yeah, I think other projects in the company are using tools for logging, and we use Winston on the Node.js side, but we just haven't gotten that far yet. The logging is something more the DevOps worry about a lot, but you have to be really careful not to log an actual error. Our rule in MTT is if you log an error, does that DevOps person really need to get out of bed at 5 a.m. to fix that? If not, it's not an error. So,
yes, so tools like Bugsnag will allow you to actually see the common errors and hide them and then do the graphing. So then you can go and say, okay, this is a one-off, so this is nothing to worry about, or this is like standard, lots of them, and we'll graph it so you will see when you put out a new version, okay, suddenly there is 10 times as many errors or maybe 5 times as many errors, whatever, so it's quite useful. So it's not really a DevOps, but more a longer-term feedback into dev.
yeah, sounds cool. The other thing about logging as well is don't forget to log what browser that someone is using. Very important.
So you mentioned that you can take screenshot of your for. Consistent or not, or is something that you cannot do that?
It's kind of up to you. I think how you Like you could probably have a Gulp task that will save off the successful images, and then when you run the tests again, you can compare the two. There's nothing directly built in. The name of something like take screenshot protractor. I can't remember. I'll post it on the meetup when I find it. I'm really bad for names.
Thank you. Interested in the transition that you've done from Java to JavaScript, and if you found the actual way of working, wondering, does that port?
So I was a Java developer for years, and in my last company I became more of a full stack developer, just the type of group I ended up working in. And as it went on, we wanted more and more JavaScript and less Java changes, just how a lot of things are moving. And I really enjoy JavaScript, although I constantly feel like I know this much, because there's just so much out there, whereas I felt like with Java, there's not so much new stuff happening. I don't find it as exciting. I feel completely out of my depth in JavaScript day to day, but you just work on one problem at a time. So it's another thing for beginners as well. It can seem really frustrating, like you're never going to understand everything. No, you're not. But that's joy of working with JavaScript. It's a lot faster pace. I really enjoy it. Every day is a new challenge. I think I would have gotten bored of sticking with the Java stuff. Maybe that was the wrong project as well. Who knows?
Just briefly, I suppose, how much discussion has there been around an upgrade path to 2.0, or is that from another day?
So we kind of have it in the back of our minds, try and keep an eye on things, but there's just not enough knowledge just yet. And you kind of feel like they could change everything in the next few weeks at the moment. So we're not worried too much about it. We probably will start worrying about it maybe after our first release. But Angular has promised an upgrade path. But we wouldn't be too keen to rush maybe to move to Angular 2.0 either. I would rather let people find all the bugs first. So.
Thank you.